Welcome back. Tonight, we're settling into the complete and unbroken story of Five Nights at Freddy's, a tale that spans decades of tragedy, obsession, and mechanical horror that begins with something as innocent as a dream of family entertainment and unfolds into one of gaming's most intricate mysteries, from humble diners in the 1970s to sprawling entertainment complexes in the modern day, from spring-lock suits that promised innovation to possessed machines that hunt in the darkness. This is a journey through every major moment, every tragedy, every resurrection in a franchise that refuses to let its ghosts rest. Whether you're here to finally understand this labyrinth of lore, letting these dark details wash over you as background to your evening, or simply allowing the story's rhythm to guide you towards sleep, we'll trace every thread from beginning to whatever end currently exists in this ever-expanding nightmare. So find somewhere comfortable, let the world outside fade into background noise, and prepare yourself for the complete timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's. Before we begin properly, if you enjoy this kind of comprehensive, sleep-friendly lore exploration, a like and subscribe helps the channel tremendously. And I'm always curious to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. There's something peaceful about knowing this same story is being told across different time zones, in quiet bedrooms and living rooms around the world, one hushed night at a time. Now then, let's begin at the beginning, back when none of this horror had yet unfolded. Back when it was just two men with a dream and some innovative costume technology. In the hazy American landscape of the early 1970s, two inventors crossed paths and decided to build something together. Henry Emily, the creative genius with a gift for robotics and engineering, and William Afton, the businessman with an eye for profit and a talent for presentation, joined forces to create Fazbear Entertainment. Their vision was straightforward, family-friendly entertainment built around innovative animatronic performers that could bring joy to children while turning a profit for the company. Posters found in later locations reference something called Fredbear's Singing Show, which appears to have been a roadside attraction from the 1930s or 1940s era. Though the exact nature of this predecessor and its connection to the later restaurants remains unclear from available evidence. The partnership seemed natural enough on the surface. Henry was the inventor, the tinkerer, the one who could take an idea and turn it into functioning machinery. He loved the creative challenge, the problem solving, the satisfaction of seeing his creations move and perform. William handled the business side, the finances, the marketing, the expansion plans. He understood how to sell an experience, how to position a brand, how to maximize revenue. Together, they opened their first location, Fredbear's Family Diner, a cozy restaurant that would introduce the world to their first major creations. The stars of Fredbear's Family Diner were two characters that would echo through the franchise's history. Fredbear himself, a golden bear with a friendly demeanor and a top hat, and Spring Bonnie, a yellow rabbit with a similar cheerful design. But these weren't ordinary animatronics. Henry had developed something innovative, spring-lock suits. These were hybrid designs that could function in two different ways. When the internal spring locks were wound tightly, the mechanical components inside the suit would compress, creating space for a human performer to wear the costume. The employee could then entertain guests directly, walking among them, interacting with children, creating that personal touch that pure animatronics couldn't provide. When no employee was inside, the spring locks could be released, allowing the mechanical endoskeleton to expand and the suit to function as a standard animatronic, performing on stage with programmed movements and pre-recorded dialogue. It was brilliant in concept, offering versatility and cost-effectiveness. a single suit could serve multiple purposes, reducing the need for separate costumes and animatronics. The technology represented genuine innovation in the field of entertainment robotics. But as with so many innovations rushed into practical use, the spring-lock suits carried inherent dangers that weren't immediately apparent. The locking mechanisms were sensitive, requiring precise winding and careful handling. Even a small amount of moisture, a drop of sweat or a spill, could cause the locks to loosen. If that happened while someone was wearing the suit, the compressed animatronic parts would snap back into their original positions with tremendous force. The steel and circuitry would spring outward, essentially turning the inside of the suit into a cage of metal spikes. Fatal didn't begin to cover it. The company trained employees carefully, emphasizing the importance of proper winding procedures and keeping the suits dry. Training tapes explain the dangers in calm, procedural tones, treating catastrophic injury as just another workplace hazard to be managed through proper protocol. And for a while, with careful handling, the system worked. Performers climbed into the suits, entertained children, and climbed back out again without incident. The danger was theoretical, a possibility rather than an experienced reality. The business grew, and that growth brought Fazbear Entertainment into contact with other companies in the entertainment and manufacturing space. One such partnership formed with a man named Edwin Murray, who had inherited his father's business, Murray's Costume Manor, often referred to simply by its address number, 990. Edwin's factory produced carnival games, costumes, mascots, and props for various entertainment ventures. He supplied materials for Fazbear events, creating floats for celebrations, and designing mascot costumes that would appear in later Fazbear locations. Characters like Montgomery Gator and Roxanne Wolf, who wouldn't become prominent until decades later, had their design origins in Fiona Murray's artwork at Murray's Costume Manor. Edwin's wife Fiona was a talented puppeteer and designer who voiced robotic guides and created the visual aesthetics for various mascots. But while these business partnerships flourished, something darker was brewing beneath the surface of William Afton's outward success. Where Henry found fulfillment in his family life and his creative work, William felt overlooked, underappreciated, frustrated. He had the business acumen, handled the financial side, managed the expansion, and yet Henry received the recognition as the inventor, the genius, the creative force. William had achieved success by conventional measures, wealth, a growing company, a family of his own, but something gnawed at him. That frustration, that sense of being secondary, would fester and eventually lead him down a path that would define the entire franchise's tragic trajectory. The early diner was successful by all accounts. Children gathered around Fredbear and Spring Bonnie for songs and stories. Birthday parties filled the dining room with laughter. Families made memories that were supposed to be happy ones. The animatronics performed their shows, the Springlock suits allowed for closer interaction, and Fazbear Entertainment began to expand. They opened additional locations, introduced new characters to join Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. Freddy Fazbear himself, the brown bear who would eventually give his name to the entire pizza franchise. Bonnie the bunny, a purple guitarist. Chica the chicken, with her cheerful demeanor and accompanying cupcake. Foxy the pirate, designed with an adventurous personality. These characters were crafted to have distinct personalities and appeal, each one becoming a mascot that children could recognize and request at birthday parties. The expansion seemed to represent pure success, the American dream realized through innovation and entrepreneurship. A television show was even produced, Fredbear and Friends, a cartoon that would help cement these characters in children's minds and expand the brand's reach beyond the physical restaurant locations. The show aired in 1983, according to visible copyright dates, and featured all the main characters in animated adventures. For children watching at home, these weren't just restaurant mascots. They were beloved characters with stories and personalities. The strategy worked. Fazbear Entertainment was becoming a recognizable brand, and with that recognition came profit. But 1983 would also mark the first major tragedy that would begin unraveling everything Henry and William had built. In the Afton household, William's family life was complicated at best. He had 3 children. The oldest was Michael, a teenager who had inherited some of his father's darker tendencies toward cruelty. The middle child was Elizabeth, who was fascinated by the animatronics, particularly the ones her father was designing. The youngest, often referred to in the community as the crying child because his real name remains uncertain, was a sensitive boy plagued by fears that his family did little to help him overcome. The crying child was terrified of the animatronics, specifically the ones at Fredbear's family diner. Whether he had witnessed something disturbing, perhaps glimpsing his father or another employee in the back rooms during a Springlock suit changeover, or whether his fears stemmed purely from the uncanny nature of the large mechanical characters, his phobia was severe and debilitating. Rather than receiving support or understanding, the boy found himself the target of relentless bullying from his older brother Michael and Michael's friends. They wore masks resembling the animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, and used them to terrorize the child, jumping out from closets, cornering him in rooms, feeding his fear until it consumed most of his daily life. William, rather than protecting his youngest son or disciplining Michael, instead chose to monitor the situation through hidden cameras and speakers. He placed Fredbear plushies throughout the house, innocent-looking toys that were actually surveillance equipment, allowing William to watch and listen to his son's suffering. Through these devices, a voice would sometimes speak, offering cryptic warnings and observations that only deepened the child's isolation and fear. Whether this surveillance was meant to study fear responses, to experiment with his son as a test subject for later projects, or simply to maintain control through observation, it represented a profound failure of parenting and a glimpse into William's capacity for callousness. The week leading up to the crying child's birthday became increasingly tense. Michael and his friends escalated their torment, locking the boy in rooms, trapping him in situations where he'd encounter the animatronics, building towards something that felt inevitable in its cruelty. The child's birthday party was to be held at Fredbear's family diner, the very location that housed his greatest fears. On that day, surrounded by the festive atmosphere of singing and celebrations, the boy tried to hide, crawling under a table to escape the overwhelming anxiety of being near the animatronics. But Michael and his masked friends found him. What happened next would become one of the franchise's defining moments. Often called the Bite of 83 or the Big Bite, Michael and his friends lifted the struggling, crying child off the ground and carried him toward the stage where Fredbear was performing. As a final cruel joke, they pushed the boy's head into Fredbear's mouth, mockingly calling for a big kiss. Whether they understood the danger or simply didn't care, the result was catastrophic. The spring-lock mechanisms, perhaps loosened by the boy's tears and frantic movements, perhaps simply aged and poorly maintained, failed. Fredbear's jaw clamped down with the full force of the animatronic's mechanical strength, crushing the child's skull in an instant. The laughter died. The birthday celebration transformed into a nightmare of blood and screaming. Paramedics were called, and the crying child was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was severe. He slipped into a coma, surrounded by the very plushies that had watched him throughout his short life. Michael, confronted with the immediate consequence of his cruelty, tried to apologize, his voice trembling with regret that came too late. The Fredbear plush continued speaking through its hidden speaker, offering the cryptic promise that, "I will put you back together," a phrase that would echo through the series with multiple possible meanings. The child's visions in his fading consciousness mixed hospital sounds with distorted memories, creating the nightmare sequences that players would later experience in Five Nights at Freddy's 4, where bedroom doors opened to threats, closets hid dangers, and every shadow held the possibility of mechanical horror. The heart monitor's steady beeping eventually gave way to the prolonged tone of a flatline. The crying child passed away, the first victim in a family that would become entirely consumed by Fazbear Entertainment's tragedies. The incident forced Fazbear Entertainment to implement new safety protocols and restrictions, though the full consequences would ripple outward in ways no one could predict at the time. For William Afton, his son's death triggered something far worse than grief. Rather than processing the loss in a healthy way, rather than seeking support or making amends with his surviving children, William became obsessed with the idea of somehow reversing death, of making good on that promise to put him back together. His fascination with the puppet's possession of his partner's daughter, Charlotte, which we'll discuss shortly, would give him a twisted framework for understanding consciousness after death. If a spirit could inhabit an animatronic, if some essence could survive beyond physical death, then perhaps there was a way to restore what had been lost, to undo the damage, to defeat mortality itself. This obsession would drive William to commit terrible acts in pursuit of understanding and harnessing whatever supernatural forces allowed the dead to linger in mechanical forms. But before William's descent into serial murder, there was another tragedy that predated his son's death, one that William himself caused, and that would set a terrible precedent. Charlotte Emily, often called Charlie, was the daughter of William's business partner Henry. She was young, probably around the same age as William's own children, and she was the light of Henry's life. Henry, unlike William, was a devoted father who tried to balance his work with his family responsibilities. He designed one of his creations specifically to keep his daughter safe. The security puppet, a marionette-like animatronic with a slender design and a painted face that could have been either charming or unsettling depending on how you looked at it. The security puppet was linked to a green bracelet that Charlotte wore. If she wandered too close to exits or strayed from safe areas within Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the puppet would activate, serving as an automated guardian to ensure she stayed protected within the building's boundaries. It was an elegant solution to a parent's worry, using the very technology Henry excelled at to watch over what he loved most. The system should have worked. The programming was sound, the bracelet functioned properly, and the puppet remained vigilant in its box, waiting to spring into action if needed. But on one rainy evening in 1983, something went wrong. Whether through accident or through tampering, Charlotte ended up locked outside the pizzeria, standing alone in an alley as rain began to fall. Inside, the puppet's programming detected the breach. Charlotte had left the building, moved beyond the safe perimeter. The puppet began to emerge from its box, moving to find her, to bring her back inside to safety. But the rain was already soaking into the puppet's mechanisms, causing sparks and interference. Its movement became erratic, sluggish, as water damage compromised its circuits. William Afton arrived at the scene. Some accounts suggest he was already there, that he had deliberately arranged the situation. Others imply it was opportunity seized in a moment of dark impulse. Regardless, William saw Charlotte alone and vulnerable, and something in him, jealousy toward Henry's seemingly perfect family life, resentment at feeling overshadowed, or perhaps simply the cold calculation of testing whether the theories about possession might be real, drove him to commit his first murder. He killed Henry's daughter there in the rain, leaving her body in the alley as he departed. The puppet, still struggling through the rain, finally reached Charlotte's body. It collapsed beside her, its systems failing from the water damage, its movements stopping as circuits died in the wet and cold. And in that moment of failure, in the puppet's proximity to Charlotte's recently deceased form, something unprecedented occurred. Charlotte's spirit, whether through the puppet's connection to her via the bracelet, through the circumstances of her death, or through some property of the animatronic materials themselves, transferred into the puppet. She became the first soul to possess an animatronic, though no one understood what had happened at the time. When the puppet was eventually recovered and reactivated, it behaved differently. There was an awareness behind its movements that hadn't existed before, a purpose that went beyond its original programming. Charlotte, as the puppet, would become a guardian figure in the franchise's lore, attempting to protect other children, giving gifts, and eventually helping the spirits of other murdered children find their own vessels. Henry would later reflect on this moment as the first scar, the initial wound that allowed greater horrors to unfold, though he wouldn't understand the full implications until much later, when the pattern of possession had become undeniable. William Afton's murder of Charlotte Emily should have been discovered, investigated, prosecuted, but he evaded justice, either through careful planning or through sheer luck, and the incident was likely attributed to other causes or simply remained unsolved. What William gained from this terrible act was confirmation that something happened when a child died in proximity to animatronic equipment. The puppet's subsequent behavior suggested to him that consciousness could persist beyond death, that the barrier between living and dead was more permeable than previously understood. This realization, combined with his desperate desire to put back together his own deceased son, would drive William down a path of serial murder in pursuit of understanding and controlling this supernatural phenomenon. The tragedy of Charlotte's death and the crying child's accident at Fredbear's occurred in close temporal proximity, both in 1983, though the exact sequence remains somewhat ambiguous in the historical record. What's clear is that 1983 represented a turning point where innocent family entertainment began transforming into something darker, where the promise of joy and wonder started curdling into possession and tragedy. The springlock suits, initially representing innovation, had now claimed a life through mechanical failure. A murderer had discovered that animatronics could house more than circuitry and programming, and two fathers, Henry and William, found themselves on opposite sides of an expanding horror, one seeking justice and closure, the other pursuing twisted resurrection through any means necessary. Following these initial tragedies, Fazbear Entertainment faced decisions about how to proceed. The springlock suits, already dangerous under the best circumstances, were now directly implicated in a child's death. reports emerged of multiple simultaneous spring lock failures at other locations, incidents that suggested the technology was fundamentally unsafe despite training protocols. The company's response was to temporarily decommission the spring lock suits entirely, removing them from active use in all locations. Audio training tapes were distributed to employees explaining that the suits were temporarily unfit for employees due to safety concerns, a bureaucratic way of acknowledging that people were dying inside them. This decommissioning had broader implications than just removing a performance option. The company also sealed off the safe rooms, hidden spaces in each location that weren't marked on digital maps and weren't visible to the animatronics programming. These rooms had originally served as storage for equipment and as emergency refuges for employees if animatronics malfunctioned during after hours, but they were now considered liabilities. Sealing them off and erasing them from the official layout meant that the old spring lock suits would simply be stored away, locked in rooms that officially didn't exist, accumulating dust in darkness while the company moved forward with pure animatronic performers that didn't require human operators. William Afton was well aware of these hidden rooms. He understood their location in each building and the fact that they weren't monitored by security systems or accessible to the roaming animatronics. This knowledge would later prove crucial to his methods of murder and concealment. But in the immediate aftermath of 1983, William was more focused on his family situation and his growing obsessions than on immediate action. Elizabeth Afton, his daughter, was still alive but increasingly curious about her father's work. Michael Afton, burdened with guilt over his brother's death, would eventually seek his own path toward understanding and perhaps atonement. And William himself was beginning to plan something that would combine his business ventures with his darker investigations into possession and consciousness. William Afton founded his own robotics company, Afton Robotics LLC, giving him direct control over animatronic design and manufacturing separate from Henry's oversight at Fazbear Entertainment proper. This company allowed William to pursue his own ideas about animatronic functionality, ideas that went far beyond simple entertainment. He designed a new line of animatronics called the Fun Times, and unlike the family-friendly performers that Henry created, William's Fun Times had a sinister secret built into their very core. They were designed to kill children. The Funtime animatronics featured advanced capabilities that seemed impressive on the surface. Voice mimicry systems that could replicate sounds and speech patterns, making them excellent at entertainment and distraction. Facial recognition technology that could identify and track individuals. Sophisticated movement programming that made them more lifelike and engaging. But hidden in their blueprints were other features. Storage tanks built into their torsos, claw mechanisms designed to grab and restrain, sound dampening materials, pathfinding systems for tracking targets. Everything was carefully designed to serve a dual purpose, one innocent and explainable, the other horrifying. William planned to open a new location featuring these Funtime animatronics, Circus Baby's Pizza World. The star attraction was Circus Baby herself, designed as a clown with emerald eyes, orange hair, and a cheerful demeanor. Baby had a special feature, an ice cream dispenser in her torso that would attract children close, allowing her claw mechanism to grab them and pull them inside her storage tank. Funtime Freddy, a bear with blue accents and a hand puppet named Bon Bon, could distract and entertain while using sophisticated tracking. Funtime Foxy, with its sleek design and agility, could pursue and corner targets. Ballora, a graceful ballerina animatronic with auditory sensors, could detect children hiding in quiet spaces. The whole ensemble represented William's twisted engineering, entertainment robots that could also function as automated killing machines. William had specific warnings for his daughter Elizabeth. He told her explicitly to stay away from Circus Baby, to never approach her, to never be alone with any of the animatronics. Whether this was genuine parental concern, trying to prevent the same fate that befell the crying child, or whether William's warnings actually made Elizabeth more curious about the animatronics he was designing. The result was tragedy. During a private test run before the official opening, Elizabeth found herself alone in a room with Circus Baby. The ice cream dispenser activated, offering a treat that drew Elizabeth close enough for the claw mechanism to activate. Baby grabbed Elizabeth and pulled her inside the storage tank. The force and confinement killed her. William immediately shut down Circus Baby's Pizza World, fabricating a cover story about gas leaks to explain the emergency closure without admitting that his own daughter had been killed by his own creation. News reports and official statements mentioned the gas leak, but whispers and rumors hinted at something more disturbing having occurred. The Funtime animatronics were relocated, moved into an underground facility that William constructed beneath his own house, a place that would later be known as Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals. The animatronics were kept in this subterranean complex, maintained and occasionally rented out for private events, but never given another proper pizzeria location. Elizabeth's death had an unexpected result that paralleled Charlotte's possession of the puppet. Elizabeth's spirit merged with Circus Baby, inhabiting the animatronic that had killed her. Unlike a pure possession, where a soul simply inhabits an empty vessel, Elizabeth's merging with Baby combined human consciousness with the animatronic's sophisticated AI systems. Baby retained memories of being Elizabeth, while also maintaining the programming and personality that William had given her. This fusion created something more aware, more calculating than a simple possessed animatronic. Baby understood what she was and what had happened, and she retained fragments of her human intelligence and emotional capacity, while also having access to the animatronic's capabilities and knowledge. William's response to losing a second child reveals much about his character. Where a normal person might have recognized the pattern, might have stepped back from the dangerous obsessions and experiments, might have sought help or changed course, William instead saw confirmation of his theories. Elizabeth's possession of Baby proved that consciousness could transfer into animatronic forms. Combined with Charlotte's possession of the puppet, it suggested that this phenomenon was reliable and repeatable. If children's spirits could inhabit the machines that killed them, then perhaps William could replicate the process deliberately. Perhaps he could create vessels for his deceased son's spirit. Perhaps he could achieve what the cryptic promise suggested and put him back together. This line of thinking led William to plan what would become known as the Missing Children Incident, a series of murders that would define Fazbear Entertainment's horrifying legacy. But before examining those murders in detail, it's important to understand the business landscape and William's positioning. Fazbear Entertainment had multiple locations operating by the mid-1980s. The original Fredbear's Family Diner still existed, though it was being phased out in favor of the more modern Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations. These newer pizzerias featured the standard animatronic band Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, performing on stages without the dangerous spring-lock suit technology. The restaurants were popular with families, hosting countless birthday parties and celebrations, creating memories for children who had no idea about the darkness lurking in the company's history. In 1985, William Afton put his plan into action. He retrieved one of the old Spring Bonnie suits from a sealed safe room, the Yellow Rabbit costume that could still function as a wearable suit if handled carefully. Using this disguise, William could walk through Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, appearing as a friendly character, building trust with children, while hiding his identity from security cameras and witnesses. Over the course of several visits, William lured children away from the main dining areas and into the hidden safe room, the one that didn't appear on maps and wasn't monitored by cameras or accessible to the animatronics. The exact details of how William gained each child's trust varied. For a girl named Susie, he exploited her grief over a dead dog, claiming he could show her where her pet was. For others, he offered promises of prizes, special treats, or exclusive access to behind-the-scenes areas. Children, naturally trusting of adults and excited by the promise of something special, followed him willingly into spaces they shouldn't have accessed. Once in the safe room, William murdered them. The methods and specifics remain mercifully vague in the historical record, but the outcome was 5 dead children in rapid succession, all killed by the same man in the same location. The victims became known collectively as the missing children. Their names, eventually pieced together through various sources, were Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy. Some evidence suggests there might have been a 6th victim, though accounts vary on this detail. After murdering the children, Williams stuffed their bodies into the restaurant's animatronic suits, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and one into a spare Golden Freddy suit that was kept in back. The bodies weren't immediately discovered. Sealed inside the animatronics, hidden from view, they remained there even as the restaurant continued operating, the smell eventually becoming noticeable, but attributed to poor maintenance or malfunctioning equipment rather than decomposing remains. The missing children incident triggered investigations and media coverage. Children had disappeared from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Witnesses reported seeing a Yellow Rabbit character, and suspicions naturally fell on the restaurant and its employees. William Afton was likely questioned as a co-founder of the company, but there was insufficient evidence to charge him with any crime. The investigation eventually stalled without conclusive results, leaving families without closure and the public with an unsolved mystery that would haunt Fazbear Entertainment's reputation. But something else happened in the aftermath of these murders. Something that would validate Williams' theories and create the franchise's most iconic elements. The puppet, still possessed by Charlotte Emily's spirit, and driven by her protective instincts, approached the bodies hidden in the animatronic suits. In a scene depicted through cryptic minigames, the puppet gave gifts to the children, though what exactly these gifts represented remains interpretable. Most likely, the puppet helped facilitate the children's possession of the animatronics that contained their remains, serving as a bridge or catalyst that allowed their spirits to merge with the mechanical forms. The 5 missing children's spirits inhabited the animatronics. Gabriel possessed Freddy Fazbear, taking on the role of the band's leader even in death. Jeremy's spirit merged with Bonnie, the purple guitarist. Susie became Chica, the chicken animatronic with the cupcake companion. Fritz possessed Foxy, the pirate, and Cassidy, the most vengeful of them all, inhabited Golden Freddy. Though this possession was different, Golden Freddy didn't have a functional endoskeleton in most accounts, existing more as a spirit that could manifest through the suit rather than a fully operational animatronic. This made Cassidy's presence more ethereal and less bound to physical location than the others. The possessed animatronics began exhibiting behaviors that their programming couldn't explain. They moved during hours they shouldn't have been active. They wandered the building rather than staying on stage. Most disturbing, they became hostile toward adults, particularly those wearing security uniforms that resembled the outfit William Afton wore during his murders. The children's spirits, confused and traumatized, couldn't distinguish between innocent security guards and the man who killed them. They saw the uniform and associated it with danger and betrayal. Their response was to attack, attempting to stuff any adult they found into spare animatronic suits, a behavior that mirrored what had been done to their own bodies. The franchise's creator, Scott Cawthon, described the children's spirits as having animal-like instincts after possession. They retained fragments of their humanity, their confusion and fear and anger, but they also took on characteristics of the animatronics they inhabited. They could no longer fully distinguish friend from foe, safe from dangerous. They were children trying to protect themselves in the only way their new forms allowed, through violence and forced transformation, turning others into what they had become. This behavior made the animatronics extremely dangerous to anyone working at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza after hours, creating the central tension that drives the gameplay in multiple franchise entries. The original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where the missing children incident occurred, closed shortly after the disappearances, unable to recover from the scandal and bad publicity. Families stopped booking birthday parties, revenue plummeted, and the location was left to decay. But the animatronics remained, standing in darkness as their possessed inhabitants learned what they had become and began to understand the hatred they felt toward the man who had done this to them. William Afton had achieved a sick confirmation of his theories. Children's spirits could possess animatronics, consciousness persisted beyond death, and the dead could be bound to mechanical forms. But rather than bringing him closer to restoring his son, he had simply created more victims, more suffering, more ghosts in the machine. Around the same time period, William's underground facility beneath his house was being used for purposes beyond just storing the fun-time animatronics. He created a testing chamber designed to replicate and study fear responses, particularly the kind of fear his deceased son had experienced. The facility included a bedroom mock-up and the hallways, where William could subject test victims to prolonged terror using hallucinogenic gas, mechanical threats, and sensory manipulation. The goal seemed to be understanding how sustained fear affected consciousness, possibly in the hopes of somehow accessing or communicating with his son's spirit through recreating his lived experience. These experiments were automated, running on programming that could operate independently for extended periods. Subjects, often vulnerable children who wouldn't be missed, would be sealed in the facility and subjected to endless nights of horror. Food was dispensed automatically, keeping them alive while nightmare scenarios played out around them. The hallucinogenic gas distorted their perceptions, making ordinary endoskeletons appear as twisted, monstrous versions of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. These nightmare animatronics would pursue subjects through the simulated home environment, creating trauma that lasted far beyond physical harm. The entire operation was morally reprehensible and achieved little beyond proving that William Afton had descended fully into monstrousness in pursuit of his obsessions. Meanwhile, Fazbear Entertainment was attempting to rehabilitate its public image and continue operations despite the shadow cast by the missing children incident. In 1987, a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened. This one featuring updated technology and a completely redesigned set of animatronics. The toy animatronics, as they came to be known, were brightly colored, child-friendly in design, and equipped with sophisticated facial recognition systems linked to a criminal database. The idea was to create animatronics that could actively protect children by identifying dangerous individuals and alerting staff. The toy line included Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, and a reassembled version of an animatronic called Mangle, likely a Toy Foxy that had been damaged and rebuilt multiple times by children pulling it apart during daytime events. The withered originals, the possessed animatronics from the closed location, were brought to this new pizzeria but relegated to a back parts and service room. They were in terrible condition, stripped for components to build the toy animatronics, showing exposed endoskeletons and severe wear. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy sat in that dim back room, still possessed by the children's spirits, waiting in the darkness. The puppet was also present at this location, still inhabited by Charlotte's protective spirit, housed in its music box, which had to be wound regularly to keep it pacified. The new location should have represented a fresh start, but William Afton's presence ensured history would repeat itself. At some point during the location's operation, William donned another Spring Bonnie suit, possibly the same one he had used before, and committed a second round of murders. These killings are referenced in minigames, where a withered animatronic pursues a purple figure through the pizzeria, encountering dead children's bodies along the way. The puppet attempts to save them, to help their spirits find vessels, but the message, "You can't," appears, suggesting this time the intervention failed or was incomplete. Whether the toy animatronics became possessed by these second victims remains unclear. Their aggressive behavior toward adults could stem from supernatural possession, or it could result from their facial recognition systems malfunctioning in ways that mimicked haunted behavior. The distinction matters less than the outcome. The toy animatronics posed genuine dangers that would contribute to the location's eventual closure. The 1987 location had hired a security guard named Jeremy Fitzgerald for the night shift, a role that put him at odds with both the aggressive toy animatronics and the withered originals who continued their hostile patrols. Phone Guy, an employee who recorded training messages for new security staff, left increasingly urgent calls describing the strange behavior of the animatronics and the company's desperation to maintain operations despite mounting problems. Jeremy survived 5 nights of mechanical pursuit, using cameras, lights, and an empty Freddy head as a disguise to avoid being caught and stuffed into a suit. On the 6th night, Jeremy was moved to day shift for a birthday party, meant to keep an eye on the animatronics during actual operating hours to prevent any incidents. Phone Guy's final message mentioned this reassignment, noting how the animatronics had become aggressive even during the day, which should have been impossible given their programming. During that birthday party, one of the animatronics attacked, biting down on Jeremy's forehead with enough force to remove his frontal lobe. The culprit's identity was never officially confirmed, though evidence points toward either Mangle or Toy Chica, each with circumstantial support in various game details. The incident became known as the Bite of 87, and Jeremy survived the physical trauma but with permanent brain damage. The Bite of 87 sealed the location's fate. The restaurant closed immediately, The toy animatronics were scrapped entirely due to their involvement in the incident, and new company-wide policies were implemented restricting animatronics movements during daytime hours. The withered originals were slated to be refurbished for a potential future reopening, as they hadn't been directly responsible for the bite and represented the company's classic characters. But the damage to Fazbear Entertainment's reputation was severe. 2 different bites, one in 1983 that killed a child, and one in 1987 that maimed an employee, plus 2 separate missing children incidents, created a pattern that no amount of corporate spin could fully obscure. Phone Guy continued working for Fazbear Entertainment, eventually becoming the day shift security guard and later a trainer who recorded helpful messages for new hires. When the company reopened yet another Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location in 1993, Phone Guy was among the staff trying to keep things running despite the building's age, budget constraints, and the fact that they were using the refurbished, withered animatronics, the same ones still possessed by the original missing children. This location, the one featured in the first 5 nights at Freddy's game, was essentially a last-ditch effort to keep the brand alive, operating on a shoestring budget in a deteriorating building. The 1993 location operated for a while, long enough for Phone Guy to record a week's worth of training messages for the next security guard. His messages painted a picture of a restaurant barely holding together, dealing with animatronics that roamed at night, supposedly to prevent servo lockups, though the real reason was the possessed spirit's need to move and hunt. Phone Guy's tone was casual, friendly even, trying to downplay the very real danger that nighttime staff faced. He mentioned the bite of 87, explained the animatronics' mistaken perception of humans as endoskeletons needing to be stuffed into suits, and offered practical survival tips about conserving power and checking cameras regularly. During Phone Guy's final week on the night shift, before he could transition out and pass the job along, the animatronics cornered him. His last message played out on night 4, capturing his growing panic as he realized the situation was terminal. Bonnie or Foxy began forcing their way into his office, the sound of doors being pounded, movement in the hallway, the music box winding down suggesting the puppet was also active. Phone Guy's death scream, distorted through phone static, confirmed that another person had fallen victim to the possessed animatronic's aggression. His body was likely stuffed into a suit, another victim of the cycle he had tried to explain away as mechanical malfunction and programming quirks. The next security guard hired for the location was a man who went by Mike Schmidt. Based on various contextual clues, including the timing, behavior patterns, and details revealed in later entries, many have concluded this was likely Michael Afton, using an alias, William's surviving son, returning to investigate his family's dark legacy. Michael, carrying guilt and perhaps seeking to understand what his father had created and what horrors he was responsible for, took the night shift at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Over 5 nights, Michael survived encounters with the possessed animatronics, managing power consumption, monitoring cameras, and closing doors just in time to prevent Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy from reaching him. The spirits hunting him may have recognized him on some level. Michael was an Afton, bearing his father's features, possibly triggering memories of the man who killed them. Yet he also wasn't the one who murdered them, creating a complex dynamic where the animatronics might have been drawn to him without fully understanding why. Michael survived to see the 6th night and even a 7th custom night, where he adjusted the animatronics' aggression levels proving his capability to endure. But he was eventually fired, not for failing to survive, but for tampering with the animatronics by adjusting their AI settings, and for odor, suggesting something wrong with his physical condition. That detail about odor would become more significant later in the timeline, hinting at Michael's own complicated relationship with life and death. The 1993 location closed at the end of the year, the last attempt to keep Freddy Fazbear's Pizza operational as a restaurant chain. The building was abandoned, left to decay, with the animatronics remaining inside. Over the following years, or possibly even decades, the sealed safe rooms remained untouched. The animatronics stood motionless in darkness, and the children's spirits continued their vigil, waiting for the man who murdered them to return. And eventually, William Afton did return, though whether years or decades had passed remains uncertain in the established timeline. William came back to the abandoned pizzeria with a specific goal: to dismantle the possessed animatronics and extract whatever supernatural essence powered them. He had learned through his experiments that some property of the animatronic materials, when combined with children's spirits, created what could be called remnant, a substance that carried consciousness and could theoretically grant forms of immortality or resurrection. William wanted to harvest this remnant, possibly to use in new experiments, possibly to achieve his own immortality, possibly still chasing the dream of restoring his deceased son, using either stealth or supernatural means, possibly employing a dark apparition called Shadow Freddy to lure the animatronics. William brought Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy one by one into the safe room, where he dismantled their physical forms. But the children's spirits didn't dissipate with the destruction of their vessels. Instead, they manifested directly, ghostly apparitions of the 5 murdered children, now free from their mechanical prisons and confronting their killer face to face. William, seeing these ghosts approaching, panicked. He spotted the old spring Bonnie suit in the corner of the safe room, the same suit he had worn during his murders, and climbed inside, thinking it would offer protection, or perhaps counting on the children's association with the spring-lock suits as entertainment, rather than as instruments of death. The safe room was damp from years of neglect, possibly from rain leaking through a deteriorating roof, possibly from poor ventilation and condensation. The moisture, combined with William's movements and possible breathing within the suit, loosened the spring-lock mechanisms that had been compressed for years. The locks failed. Every metal component, every piece of the endoskeleton that had been carefully compressed to make room for a human body, snapped back into place with tremendous force. Steel rods punctured William's flesh. Mechanical parts impaled him through vital organs. The suit essentially became a torture device, lined with spikes all triggered simultaneously. William Afton died slowly inside the spring Bonnie suit, the pain unimaginable as he drowned in his own blood while pinned by metal spikes. The children's spirits watched this poetic justice unfold, their killer trapped inside the very disguise he had used to earn their trust, suffering as he bled out over what could have been minutes or even hours. When William finally died, his corpse remained inside the suit, the body too damaged and intertwined with the mechanical components to be extracted. The safe room's walls were sealed up, either by someone who didn't want the murder scene discovered or simply as part of closing down the location. William's body, still inside the spring Bonnie suit, now stained with his blood and decay, was left behind those walls, entombed in darkness. But something unexpected happened. Just as the children's spirits had possessed the animatronics that contained their remains, William's spirit remained bound to the spring bonnie suit that held his corpse. Whether through the same mechanism that caused the children's possessions, through the remnant he had extracted and possibly injected into himself, or through sheer force of will and refusal to accept death, William Afton's consciousness persisted. He became Springtrap, a horrifying amalgamation of rotted human remains and rusted animatronic components, trapped inside the suit but somehow still aware, still moving, still existing in a state between life and death. The children's spirits, having witnessed his death, dispersed temporarily, their direct vengeance apparently complete, even though William's consciousness had not actually ended. 30 years passed, or approximately 30 years. The exact duration is vague in the canon. The abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza sat decaying, becoming a local legend, a place whispered about by kids daring each other to explore haunted buildings. Eventually, an entrepreneurial group decided to capitalize on the location's dark reputation by creating a horror attraction called Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction. They scavenged items from the old locations, collecting props, posters, empty animatronic shells, and any Fazbear Entertainment memorabilia they could find to create an authentic atmosphere of nostalgia mixed with horror. 1 week before Fazbear's Fright's grand opening, a security guard was hired to watch the location overnight, partly for liability reasons and partly to ensure the exhibits weren't vandalized or stolen. The guard's identity is never confirmed, but many fans theorize it was Michael Afton again, continuing his pattern of returning to Fazbear locations, possibly still searching for understanding or attempting to finally put an end to the horrors his family created. The first few nights passed with the guard monitoring cameras, dealing with faulty ventilation systems, and experiencing phantom hallucinations, burned and nightmarish versions of various animatronics that triggered system malfunctions, but couldn't directly harm anyone. On the second or third night, the attraction's organizers made an extraordinary discovery. Breaking into the sealed safe room at the back of the old restaurant, they found a real animatronic still intact, a yellow rabbit suit that appeared damaged and decayed but mostly complete. They brought Springtrap to Fazbear's Fright, placing him on display as the attraction's centerpiece, completely unaware that William Afton's undead consciousness was still piloting the suit, that the corpse inside was real, or that they had just unleashed something far more dangerous than a simple prop. The guard quickly realized that Springtrap was active, moving through the attraction, appearing on cameras in different locations, behavior that no deactivated animatronic should display. The phantom animatronics became more aggressive in Springtrap's presence, suggesting that William's spirit was somehow generating these hallucinations, possibly through remnant-based abilities or through technology he had previously developed. The phantoms would jump scare the guard, causing camera systems to fail, ventilation to shut down, or audio devices to malfunction, creating vulnerabilities that Springtrap exploited in his pursuit through the attraction's corridors. The guard survived each night through careful monitoring and quick reflexes, rebooting systems as they failed, and keeping track of Springtrap's location through sound cues and camera glimpses. By the attraction's scheduled opening night, something triggered a fire. Whether the guard deliberately started it to destroy Springtrap, whether faulty wiring in the old building finally gave out, or whether Springtrap himself somehow caused the blaze, Fazbear's Fright burned down. The attraction was destroyed, the collected memorabilia lost, and investigators would later attribute the fire to faulty wiring in a deteriorating structure. But Springtrap survived the fire, escaping the burning building, Images from after the fire showed the rabbit suit moving through the ruins, damaged further by burns and smoke but still functional, still containing William Afton's consciousness, still capable of pursuit. The 30 years of entombment had simply been a pause, and now William was loose again, free to continue whatever dark purposes drove his undead existence. But William's escape wouldn't go unchallenged. Henry Emily, the partner who had lost his daughter to William's first murder, who had spent decades living with that grief while watching his company's legacy become synonymous with death and possession, who had perhaps suspected William's involvement all along, finally decided to act. Henry had been absent from the franchise's events for years, working in the background, waiting for the right moment. After Fazbear's Fright burned down and Springtrap escaped, Henry set a trap, a final plan to gather all the remaining possessed animatronics and end the cycle of possession permanently. Henry designed Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, which presented itself as a restaurant management simulation, but was actually a carefully orchestrated snare. He created a fake job listing for a pizzeria manager, counting on Michael Afton's pattern of returning to Fazbear locations to draw him in as an unwitting accomplice. The simulation involved Michael supposedly building and managing a restaurant, salvaging animatronics that appeared in the back alley. But everything was scripted to achieve Henry's real goal, assembling all the major possessed animatronics in one location. The animatronics that needed to be gathered had all evolved from earlier forms. Circus Baby, still possessed by Elizabeth Afton, had been ejected from the Ennard amalgamation and rebuilt herself into Scrap Baby, a more twisted version with exposed wiring and a claw-like hand. Ennard, after ejecting Baby, became Molten Freddy, an amalgamation of Funtime animatronic parts, possibly containing remnant from the original missing children. The puppet, still inhabited by Charlotte's protective spirit, had been captured by Henry in a new animatronic called Lefty, specifically designed to contain and transport the puppet. And Springtrap, damaged by the Fazbear's Fright fire, had rebuilt himself into Scraptrap, a more deteriorated but still functional form of William Afton's undead vessel. Each animatronic was drawn to the pizzeria Michael was supposedly managing, appearing in the back alley where they could be salvaged and brought inside. Michael, following the simulation's instructions, conducted audio prompts that essentially confirmed each animatronic's consciousness was still present, their spirits still driving them to seek out and potentially attack. He salvaged them all, Scrap Baby, Molten Freddy, Lefty containing the puppet, and Scraptrap, assembling them in the facility's subsections. The restaurant never actually opened to the public. It was always just a trap, a gathering point designed to bring all these haunted machines together under one roof. On the final night, after all the animatronics were assembled, Henry activated his endgame. He sealed the building, cutting off all exits and trapping everyone inside, including Michael, who was working in the main office. Then Henry ignited the entire facility, a fire specifically designed to burn hot enough and long enough to destroy the animatronics completely and free the spirits bound to them. As the fire spread, Henry's voice came through speakers, addressing each spirit in turn. He spoke to the employee in the main office, almost certainly Michael, thanking him for his role and offering him rest. He addressed his own daughter, Charlotte, in the puppet, apologizing for not being there to save her and hoping she would finally find peace. He spoke to the other lost souls, the children whose spirits had been trapped for so long, telling them, "It's time to rest. for you, and for those you have carried in your arms. Acknowledging that the original missing children had been through multiple forms, and to William, Henry had specific words. I'm going to come find you. I'm going to come find you. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, old friend. The fire consumed the pizzeria. Henry remained somewhere in the vicinity, possibly inside the building, possibly nearby, but definitively ending his own story alongside the end he orchestrated for others. Michael, unable to escape, burned along with the animatronics. The spirits began their final separation from the physical world. In the game's completion ending, images showed graves for the missing children: Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, with Charlotte's grave positioned slightly apart on a hill, overlooking the others in eternal guardianship even in death. The fire had accomplished what Henry intended, releasing most souls to whatever afterlife awaited them, giving them the peace and closure they had been denied for decades. But as with everything in this franchise, final doesn't mean permanent. William Afton's spirit survived even this fire, somehow clinging to existence despite Henry's best efforts. Drawing parallels from the Fazbear Frights book series, particularly stories involving characters like Andrew, who refused to let their killer rest, evidence suggests William endured in a state between life and death, trapped in what could be interpreted as a nightmare prison. The spirit often identified as Cassidy, the child who possessed Golden Freddy and who held particularly deep rage toward William based on various game clues, appears to have refused to let him move on, while the exact mechanics remain open to interpretation. This manifested as Ultimate Custom Night, where William faced endless waves of attacks from every animatronic across the franchise's history. This nightmare existence, supported by voice lines and hidden details throughout the game, could represent continued punishment, where the child William killed now served as his jailer, ensuring he would never find peace, never truly die, forever suffering for his crimes. Whether this hell was literal, a supernatural realm where souls could be imprisoned, or more metaphorical, a state of consciousness trapped between death and existence, William Afton experienced what the games presented as Ultimate Custom Night, facing increasing aggression from manifestations of those he had wronged, unable to escape, unable to die permanently. But while William's spirit was imprisoned in this nightmare, something else was developing that would eventually free him in a different form. Fazbear Entertainment, after years of scandal and closures, attempted to rehabilitate its public image through an unusual strategy. They commissioned an indie game developer to create video games based on the company's history, games that would present the murders, disappearances, and haunted animatronics as fictional stories, urban legends blown out of proportion. The idea was to bury the truth under layers of irony and self-aware horror entertainment, letting people think the dark stories were always just creepypastas rather than events that actually occurred. To make these games authentic, Fazbear Entertainment provided the indie developer with circuit boards from old animatronics, physical components that could be scanned, and their data used to recreate authentic movements, sounds, and behaviors in virtual reality. But these circuit boards carried more than just programming data. They were physically part of the animatronics that had been possessed, materials that had housed spirits, potentially containing traces of remnant or spiritual energy, or whatever supernatural force bound consciousness to machinery. When these boards were scanned into the VR system being developed, something transferred that shouldn't have been possible to transfer. A digital entity emerged within the Freddy Fazbear virtual experience, something that called itself, or came to be called, Glitch Trap, manifesting as a strange rabbit figure that didn't quite match any existing character design. The exact nature of Glitch Trap remains a subject of interpretation. Evidence suggests it could be a digital manifestation blending the mimic's advanced AI programming with elements that behave remarkably similar to William Afton's patterns, possibly fragments of his memories embedded in the circuit boards or behavioral data coded into the animatronic systems over years. Whether Glitch Trap represents a branch of the mimic's programming that learned to imitate Afton, actual remnants of William's consciousness, or something between these possibilities. The entity exhibited behaviors consistent with William's personality: manipulative, predatory, obsessed with control, but in a form that could exist and propagate through computer code rather than through physical machinery. Beta testers for the VR game began experiencing strange occurrences. Jeremy, one of the first testers, reported nightmares and hallucinations. Glitch Trap appearing in his peripheral vision during testing sessions, watching him through windows. The psychological stress became unbearable, culminating in Jeremy mutilating himself with a guillotine paper slicer, an incident that left disturbing evidence, but was covered up by the company. Another tester called Tape Girl documented Glitch Trap's presence in hidden audio logs, warning future players about the entity and attempting to fragment the infected code into separate tape files to contain it. But containment failed when Vanessa, a new beta tester and security staff member, encountered Glitch Trap fully formed within the game's code. Through a minigame called Pizza Party, Glitch Trap lured Vanessa deeper into the virtual environment, recreating William's methods of luring children. When Vanessa collected all the scattered tape fragments, completing Glitch Trap's code unintentionally, the entity achieved enough coherence to influence her directly. Glitch Trap merged partially with Vanessa, not full possession, but enough to manipulate her thoughts, create alternate personas, and guide her actions even outside the VR environment. Vanessa began exhibiting signs of Glitch Trap's influence through her online activity. Encrypted messages suggesting she was building something, searching for information about creating compliance in human subjects, ordering materials. In the Curse of Dreadbear DLC that followed the main VR experience, Vanessa returned to collect keys hidden in Halloween-themed levels, eventually crafting a white rabbit mask with stitched patches that would become her costume as Vanny, a corrupted follower of Glitch Trap who would act as his agent in the physical world. The transformation from Vanessa, the security professional, to Vanny, the reluctant accomplice, represented Glitch Trap's success in escaping pure digital confinement and finding a puppet through which to act. Fazbear Entertainment also launched an augmented reality service called Fazbear Funtime Service or Special Delivery, sending animatronic replicas directly to customers' homes for entertainment. The service scanned more old circuit boards to program these replica animatronics, unknowingly spreading Glitch Trap's influence like a virus. The AR animatronics began hunting their supposed customers rather than entertaining them, controlled by the corrupted code that turned every system it touched into another vector for pursuit and attack. Variants and skins proliferated: Toxic Springtrap, Flaming Springtrap, character reskins that suggested the code could replicate William's Springtrap form across multiple instances. Decades after the pizzeria simulator fire, Fazbear Entertainment attempted its most ambitious project yet: Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex, an enormous entertainment complex built directly atop the ruins of the burned pizzeria. The location featured bowling alleys, racing tracks, mini golf courses, arcades, multiple stages, dining areas, and extensive backstage facilities, all watched over by a new generation of animatronics called the Glamrocks. These included Glamrock Freddy, the friendly face of the complex, with orange fur and rockstar aesthetics, Glamrock Chica, with her bright colors and energetic personality, Montgomery Gator, who had replaced a previous character named Glamrock Bonnie after a suspicious incident, and Roxanne Wolf, with her competitive racing theme. The Pizzaplex was highly automated, staffed primarily by robots rather than human employees, with security handled by staff bots and cleaning managed by other automated systems. Underneath this modern entertainment complex, in the sinkhole that had formed around the old pizzeria's ruins, something from the past remained. In one ending of security breach, a deteriorated animatronic called Burn Trap appears in a recharging station connected to old computer systems. The ruined DLC would later reveal the mimic imprisoned in this same area, with evidence like matching claw marks suggesting a strong connection between the two. Whether Burn Trap represented the mimic wearing a costume to appear as Springtrap, William Afton's consciousness somehow transferred to or controlling the mimic, or separate entities occupying the same space, remains a matter of interpretation. What's clearer is that the mimic, an entity whose origins trace back to Edwin Murray's tragic creation, was sealed beneath the Pizzaplex and represented an ongoing threat distinct from but possibly influenced by William Afton's legacy. Vanessa, influenced by Glitchtrap, worked as head security at the Pizzaplex. She manipulated systems, created backdoor access, and occasionally manifested her Vanny persona, wearing the rabbit mask and hunting through the corridors. The Glamrock animatronics, despite being new constructions, began exhibiting glitches and aggressive behaviors that suggested either Glitchtrap's corruption spreading through their systems, or something from the ruins below affecting their programming. Gregory, a young boy who became trapped in the Pizzaplex after hours, found himself pursued through the massive complex with only Glamrock Freddy, who had rebooted in safe mode that disconnected him from the corrupted network as an ally and protection. Over the course of one long night, Gregory navigated the Pizzaplex's various attractions, upgrading Freddy with parts salvaged from other Glamrocks who were hunting them. Chica's voice box improved Freddy's audio systems. Roxy's eyes enhanced his visual capabilities. Monty's claws gave him the ability to break through certain barriers. Each upgrade came at the cost of permanently disabling another animatronic, creating a progression where Gregory and Freddy became more capable, while their hunters were systematically taken apart. The night's events culminated in multiple possible endings, but the one that appears most canonical involved Gregory accessing a series of arcade games called Princess Quest. The Princess Quest games were more than simple entertainment. They represented a battle in digital space, with a princess character fighting to free herself from a dark influence. By completing Princess Quest 3, Gregory effectively purged or weakened Glitchtrap's hold over Vanessa, freeing her from the Vanny persona's control. The three escaped together: Gregory, Freddy's severed but still functioning head, and Vanessa now free from corruption, leaving the Pizzaplex as the sun rose. But the ending suggested this freedom was temporary or incomplete, that threats remained in the ruins below, and that the cycle might continue in new forms. Months after the Pizzaplex's abandonment following security breaches events, a girl named Cassie received a message, supposedly from Gregory, her friend, who had disappeared during the Pizzaplex incident. The message claimed Gregory was trapped inside the decaying facility and needed help. Cassie, loyal and brave despite the obvious danger, entered the abandoned Pizzaplex to search for her friend. The building had deteriorated significantly, overgrown with vegetation, sections collapsed, systems failing, animatronics damaged and hostile in their ruined forms. Cassie was given a security mask that let her interact with augmented reality nodes left throughout the facility, revealing hidden pathways and deactivating certain security systems. As Cassie navigated the ruins, she encountered the damaged Glamrock animatronics, now in horrifying states called ruined, and was guided by a helpful character named Helpy, a cartoon mascot appearing through the AR system. But the guidance was deceptive. The voice claiming to be Gregory was actually something called the Mimic, an advanced AI that could replicate voices and personalities, something that had been imprisoned beneath the Pizzaplex and was using Cassie to free itself. The Mimic had learned to imitate Gregory perfectly, luring Cassie deeper into the facility, while systematically having her disable the security measures that kept it contained. The Mimic's origins trace back to another tragedy in the franchise's extended lore, the creation of an adaptive learning AI by a man named Edwin Murray, who had used it to try replacing his deceased son, accidentally imprinting violence into its programming through his own grief-fueled breakdown. The Mimic had eventually been sealed away, but Fazbear Entertainment had apparently incorporated its technology, or potentially the actual Mimic endoskeleton, into the Pizzaplex's systems, creating another layer of danger beneath the surface. When Cassie finally reached the elevator that would supposedly save Gregory, the real Gregory's voice cut through, warning her that it had all been a deception. Someone, either Gregory to prevent the Mimic's escape, or the Mimic itself to eliminate a witness, cut the elevator's cable, plunging Cassie into darkness in an ambiguous ending that left her fate uncertain. The Ruin DLC's conclusion presented multiple possible outcomes through different ending sequences. In one, Cassie deviates to a control room where a scooper, that same device that once hollowed out Michael Afton, activates and drags the Mimic away, potentially destroying it and giving Cassie a chance to escape. In another, Cassie experiences a peaceful AR hallucination, showing Vanessa and the Helpy mascot releasing balloons for lost souls, possibly indicating Cassie's death and transition to an afterlife. The most discussed ending is the elevator fall, leaving Cassie trapped below in the dark, possibly injured, possibly pursued by the Mimic if it survived. Roxy's distant call might indicate rescue coming, or might be another deception. The ambiguity serves the franchise's tradition of unclear conclusions that leave room for continuation. Throughout all of these events, certain themes persist that define Five Nights at Freddy's beyond its surface horror. The franchise explores cycles of trauma and vengeance, where each act of violence creates victims who themselves perpetuate harm. Williams' murders created the possessed animatronics, who then killed security guards who were simply trying to work. Henry's attempt to end the cycle through fire led to William's survival in new forms. The children's spirits achieved revenge, but at the cost of decades trapped in machinery. Everyone in the story is trying to protect something or someone, trying to achieve justice, trying to understand what happened, trying to break free from cycles they didn't start. But the machinery of the franchise's world ensures these attempts either fail or succeed only partially, creating new problems in the process. The story examines obsession's destructive power, particularly through William Afton, whose inability to accept his son's death drove him to commit atrocities that destroyed more families and created more suffering than anything he might have prevented. His pursuit of immortality and resurrection led only to his own undead torment, trapped in states between life and death, but never achieving the reunion or restoration he claimed to seek. Even his technological innovations, the spring-lock suits, the fun-time animatronics, the experiments with Remnant, all represented brilliant engineering corrupted by terrible purpose, creating machines that entertained briefly before inevitably harming or killing. The franchise also explores how places carry history and trauma, how physical locations become haunted not just by spirits, but by memory and repetition. Each restaurant location fails and closes, but something always brings people back. New management tries to succeed where previous attempts failed. Family members return to find answers or achieve closure. The locations are rebuilt on the literal ruins of what came before. Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex, constructed directly atop the burned pizzeria simulator, ensuring that past and present overlap physically. This architectural haunting mirrors how personal trauma persists across generations, how the sins of fathers affect their children, how attempting to bury the past often just creates a shallow grave from which horrors eventually resurface. The animatronics themselves serve as powerful symbols of innocence corrupted, machines designed for entertainment becoming instruments of death, whether through mechanical failure, deliberate murderous design, or supernatural possession. The children's spirits trapped in animatronic forms exist in a terrible state where their innocence and youth are frozen in time, never aging, never moving past their trauma, instead replaying their confusion and rage through mechanical pursuit of night guards who remind them of their killer. Even the animatronics not possessed by children still carry implications of danger, of advanced AI that might achieve consciousness and resentment, of automation replacing human workers until buildings run themselves without empathy or judgment. As we trace this complete timeline from the 1970s partnership that started Fredbear's Family Diner, through to Cassie's ambiguous fate in the ruined Pizzaplex, the scope of the tragedy becomes clear. What began as two men's dream of family entertainment evolved into a multi-generational nightmare of possession, murder, and undying obsession. The franchise's core mystery: what happens when consciousness encounters machinery, when spirits bind to metal, when the dead refuse to rest, has been explored through dozens of tragedies and dozens of attempts to achieve peace or justice or understanding. And yet the story continues. Fazbear Entertainment still exists as a corporate entity attempting to rebrand and profit from its own dark history, turning tragedy into entertainment, pretending past horrors were always fiction. William Afton's consciousness persists in various forms, sometimes trapped, sometimes free, sometimes digital, sometimes physical, but never fully destroyed despite multiple attempts. The children's spirits have achieved rest in some iterations, but seem to cycle back in others, suggesting that true peace might be impossible in this world. New victims like Vanessa find themselves corrupted and used by forces they didn't know existed. New heroes like Gregory struggle against horrors they're too young to fully comprehend. The cycle continues, and perhaps that continuity, that refusal to offer clean resolution, is itself meaningful. Real trauma doesn't resolve neatly. Real grief doesn't end with a single ceremony or moment of closure. Real violence creates ripples that affect communities and families for generations. Five Nights at Freddy's, despite its animatronic animals and jump scares and game mechanics, tells a fundamentally human story about loss, about how we failed to protect the vulnerable, about how the powerful can commit atrocities while the victims are blamed or forgotten, about how attempting to control death or achieve immortality only creates new forms of suffering. The franchise's horror comes not just from the scares, but from the tragedy underneath, from recognizing that every possessed animatronic was once a child at a birthday party, that every sealed room contains someone's unanswered questions, that every reopening of a location represents corporate profit prioritized over human cost. So as we reach this point in the timeline, in early 2025, where the story currently rests, there are still questions. Is William Afton's consciousness truly ended? Or will it find yet another form to inhabit? Did Cassie survive her fall in the elevator shaft? What other secrets remain buried in old locations or sealed in forgotten systems? Will the mimic's escape lead to new tragedies, or will it be contained? Will any of the surviving characters find genuine peace, or will they continue being drawn back into Fazbear Entertainment's orbit? The franchise has proven remarkably resistant to definitive endings, always finding ways to resurrect its central conflicts in new forms, always discovering that one more location needs exploring, one more mystery needs solving, one more spirit needs freeing. But for tonight, for this journey through the complete timeline, we can rest in the knowledge that we've traced every major thread, followed the story from innocent beginnings through decades of tragedy to its current ambiguous state. We've met the major players: William Afton, the murderer who wouldn't die; Henry Emily, the creator seeking redemption; the missing children whose spirits haunted the machines; Michael Afton trying to undo his family's sins; Charlotte Emily protecting others even in death; Elizabeth trapped in her father's creation; Vanessa corrupted and freed; Gregory fighting to survive; Cassie searching for her friend. We've visited every major location, from Fredbear's Family Diner to the sprawling Mega Pizzaplex, from underground testing facilities to horror attractions built on tragedy. We've encountered every significant animatronic, from the original Freddy's band to the twisted nightmares to the friendly glam rocks. The story of Five Nights at Freddy's is vast and intricate, sometimes contradictory, often ambiguous, but always compelling in its commitment to exploring the dark spaces where childhood innocence meets mechanical horror, where family entertainment becomes a vessel for tragedy, where the dead refuse to stay dead, and the living cannot seem to escape the past's gravitational pull. It's a story that has unfolded across games, books, and films, evolving with each new entry while maintaining its core themes of loss, obsession, and the terrible persistence of consciousness beyond what should be its natural boundaries. If you made it through this entire timeline, whether listening actively to finally understand the franchise's full scope, or letting these details wash over you as background to falling asleep, or anywhere in between, thank you for joining this journey through one of gaming's most elaborate and unsettling narratives. If you found value in this comprehensive exploration, a like and subscribe would be genuinely appreciated, as they help the channel grow and allow for more detailed lore videos. Let me know in the comments which part of the timeline you found most interesting, which mysteries you hope get resolved, or which character's story affected you most. Until next time, rest well, and may your dreams be free from the sound of mechanical footsteps and musical chimes echoing through dark corridors. Good night.